Now allow me to welcome you to a full commentary on the pre-flood world, nearly touching the Garden of Eden all the way to the very end, the final days of prophecy. Commentary on the book of Enoch. This full breakdown, what we're going to cover is we're going to cover prophecies in Enoch and how they play out and how they integrate perfectly, seamlessly, like a weavework, like a fabric, with biblical prophecy and the biblical text leading all the way through the first and second coming of Jesus Christ. To do that, we're going to also take a look at Israel and its context in the book of Enoch, and that these two things in Enoch, these are the words of the blessing of Enoch: blessed be the elect and the righteous. These are two different little groups, so they're not the same word. For that, Enoch is just emphasizing something. This goes overlooked seemingly by most everyone. These are two different groups, and for that cause we need to take a look at Israel, both in the past and present day, and where they're at right this moment, and how that fits in with the book of Enoch, and also how these things plug into this unusual book called the book of Jasher, or the book of Yasher, the book of the upright. We're also going to talk a little bit about the fallen angels, the demons, the spookies, the creeps, the little things that sometimes go by the name shadow people, the aliens from your mainstream television shows. We're going to talk a little bit about where these guys came from in relation to the book of Enoch. In fact, right here on the screen, you got the little Yoda guy. He's the little wisdom guy that was telling Luke when he crashed his spaceship on whatever planet that was in part 2 of the Star Wars set, that that his problem was that he just didn't believe he could lift that spaceship out of the water with his mind if he would just listen to the little green troll-looking, snake-loving, underground-dwelling, telepathic green man from another world, otherwise known as the Yoda. Yoda was a word that Manly P. Hall used way before there was ever a Star Wars movies. Now, for the Yoda to come, you've got to be getting your spells from a grimoire or a black magic book provided by the wise old night owls. And you can see he's popping up in the magic circle, and he's being summoned here by a lifeless Levi, who, during a black magic ritual, now to get the Yoda, you've got to be in obedience to the goat-headed Baphomet. I'm going to start in with an excerpt just right out of chapter 50 of the book of Enoch, and I want you to bear in mind that many of the secular guys, hardcore commentators, and Christians who are scholars, the common belief, wonderful people that believing in Enoch is certainly not a requirement for anything. But it's commonly stated, let me point out, it's commonly stated that this is a pseudepigrapha text, or a text that somebody just made up. Now, let me also state this, that even the secular guys, even the hardcore secularist guys, they're going to have to concede that this book is at least 300 years before Jesus Christ. And I want you to evaluate that based on this one passage. Based on just this one verse. I want you to decide in your mind before we even get started, because I think that's a solid place to start, is for you to decide in your mind, based on the text itself, whether or not the hardcore scholars on the issue are correct, that this is just a flusy piece of nothing, or if this text is exactly what it says it is. And what it says it is these words are not for my generation, but for a remote one, which is for to come. the last generation. On account of the elect do I write. Those are Enoch's opening words. This is chapter 50. It's chapter 50. In those days shall the earth deliver up from her womb, and hell itself deliver up from hers that which it has received, and shall restore that which it owes. He shall select the righteous and the holy. Now, who is he? Further up in the text, you're going to hear this word, Son of Man, a lot. The elect one before the Lord of spirits. Now, Son of Man is a term that Jesus used of himself many, many, many times. And that's who's being talked about. So if we were to read up, this Son of Man is who this he is in this passage. He. And we're coming up almost to the point of tribulation. Right here in this passage, we're almost to this point of tribulation. Now let's see what he says. He, this Son of Man, at this is going to select the righteous and the holy. Holy means to be set apart. From among them, for the day of their salvation has approached. So these people have been removed from the way of something. Their countenance shall be bright with joy, for in those days shall the elect one be exalted. The earth, now I had skipped down, so there's a skip between 2 and 5. So we're actually at the end of 5. The earth shall rejoice. The righteous shall, hear this passage. The righteous, now who are the righteous? There are 2 different groups he starts with. These are the words of the blessing of Enoch. Blessed be the elect and the righteous. Now, these aren't 2 words for the same thing that he's just trying to overemphasize. These are 2 separate things, and that's specified like a fabric throughout the text. The elect, that sounds like a lot like the phrasing that is used for Israel. We're going to look at that. Just pause on that. Don't make a judgment on that yet. And the righteous, and that's the group that Enoch affiliates himself with. I, Enoch, a righteous man whose eyes were opened by the Holy One. So to be righteous, your eyes have to have been opened, and it was saw a vision of the Holy One. Then that would mean that the righteous themselves are attempting to be holy, which means set apart. So now these 2 words here, just below our little pre-flood dinosaur guy, which we're going to touch on a little bit about that pre-flood world in just a minute here. But these 2 words, elect and righteous, righteous and elect, they're not always used in your Bible as, or in the book of Enoch, as mutually exclusive. For example, in Matthew 24, Jesus himself states, and he will gather his elect from the 4 winds, another term used in Enoch a lot, or the 4 corners of the earth. Actually, both terms are used in that single passage. But it can state in the passage his elect, which is like stating righteous. But there is a tendency in biblical texts and in Enoch, I believe in Enoch, there is a tendency to veer towards this word in reference to Israel, and a tendency to veer towards this word, righteous, or the righteous, in reference to the church, or those who have their eyes open. Additionally, one more point about this word down here. Being the elect does not automatically equal a free golden ticket into heaven. It didn't in the time of Moses. They were wickedly horrible, stubborn people. Actually, all of them were. All of us are as people. It's this right here, even if you're part of the elect, it's this right here that you're striving to become part of. Enoch goes into pretty great depth talking about all sorts of demons that men in his day were worshiping as gods, and particularly in later times, that men will worship these things from here all the way to the ends of the earth as gods. And more than this, that they'll assign the sun, moon, and stars as gods and neglect the order of the sun, moon, and stars, assigning them to demons as gods. He's also quite specific about there being offspring during his time and the time to come after this flood that he's already seen in a vision. But he's redundantly specifically covering that the angels, pretending to be gods, which they want men to worship them, will have offspring who will also want men to worship them, building empires for themselves, and consider mankind like food for the gods that they can rip apart or make as servants, subjects, and slaves that they can run the whip on. But where Enoch's vision is focused in towards would be terms his elect, which would be, I believe there's a separator between saying, well, you can see it in the text, between elect and righteous. But in biblical terms, if Jesus is saying that he's going to gather his elect from the face of the earth, this doesn't mean that you were just born to a Hebrew family and so you get the lucky get out of jail free card. No, it was always pointing to Jesus, and that is specific. That is where, right to the center like a bullseye, because that's what it is. Sin means missing the mark. That is the bullseye that his tunnel vision is focused on, whether you're using the term his elect or you're using it interchangeably with the word righteous, or you were to state the bride of Christ. That this right here, amidst all of the demonic haze of madness, is where Enoch will be bringing his focus fully into. The Son of Man, the Son of God, the Word who would become flesh and dwell among us. That is Enoch's largest prophecy in those pages. The term four corners, or the angels at the four corners, to the sides of the north, or the heavens, the sides of the south, or Hades, hell, which is owned by God, by the way, the east to the west, the Alpha and Omega, beginning and the end. A lot of people seem to get upset with the book of Enoch because it's got angels and specifically some descriptions. He's actually giving job descriptions, Enoch is, for angels that are talked to him. In the Bible, you have primary focus on two particular angels. This would be Michael and Gabriel, who are amongst the four angels that Enoch is interacting with. But you get upset because they're angels in the book of Enoch, in this case angels that God himself has apparently given the role to show Enoch some things that he wants Enoch to see. But to be upset that there are, look, in the biblical text, it's saying that God's got a lot of angels, apparently as God. But God's got a large staff, according to those pages. In Zechariah 6:5, I believe, where Zechariah, he has the angel that's with him. It just sounds almost eerily identical, come to think of it, of dialogues that Enoch has. But he asked the angel who was with him, who are these four spirits that come forth on the four chariots from the throne of the Most? Well, no, that's the angel's response, that these are the four angels coming forth from the throne of the Most High. But in the book of Enoch, he's specifically stating amongst these angels Michael, who is often depicted as a warring angel, which is what I'm sure that he is. Enoch's description of Michael is he's merciful and long-suffering, which is interesting because even if Michael is going to contend with none of these angels, they are servants of God. We're servants of God. They don't do anything without God's permission. Gabriel, what he states of Gabriel, now in your biblical text, Gabriel is always the angel that's coming to announce the Mashiach or the Messiah. Comes not as terribly surprising to me that Enoch's description of Gabriel is set over all of the powers. Now, another angel that Enoch is going to mention in the book of the heavenly luminaries, talking about the movements of the stars, the movements of the celestial bodies will be Uriel. In Matthew 24:27, Jesus gives an interesting description of his second coming, this point of the gathering from the four corners of the earth, or from the ends of the earth, whatever term that you want to use, but this gathering of his elect. He says, my coming will be like lightning, is the term he uses, that goes from the east all the way over to the west. Now, in the ancient world, what I find curious and fascinating about this phrasing that he decided to go with there, when lightning comes in the east, that was a good sign in the ancient world. But when it comes in the west, it was a bad sign. So, the way that I'm reading that text, or most certainly the way that you would hear that text if you were listening to it the very hour that he spoke it, is when you see me coming like lightning from the east, a good thing, I'm coming. But when you see me pass to the west, if you're still standing there looking and you didn't ride the lightning with him, that would be a bad sign. The righteous, now, that might be the church, shall inhabit it. So they're the inhabitors. Now, what do the elect do? The elect shall, does that say possess it right there? Is that what that says? I think that is what it says. Now, right here, and the angel is speaking. That's what the angel is saying. Wait but a short time, and you shall understand. And every, not some, not a few, every secret thing shall be revealed unto you. That's who the words were for at the beginning of the text, right? So the angel's giving it to Enoch, but Enoch's giving it to you. In those days, now these days that just follow the end, a time of tear and sorrow and screams, okay? After some group of people have been selected out of the way, apparently, according to Enoch. In those days, following those, men shall not be saved by gold and silver. Now watch this last one. Nor shall they have it any longer in their power to do what? To secure themselves in and fly? Once again, I tell you, even the hardcore secular guys tell you that this text is from 300 BC. What he's saying there isn't that men won't ever fly again. What he's specifically stating in the context of that text is that the kings and uppity-ups of earth aren't, they're not going to dodge out on it. They aren't flying off to the private islands to duck out on this one and then return to check how their investments did. Not on this one. So I'm not terribly surprised in Enoch to find technology statements. And by the way, had Enoch been alive during the day of the Roman Catholic Church's rule on the planet, he would have been sitting in a jail cell next to Galileo, explaining to Galileo the real science of how astronomy worked. There are things in there that would have knocked Galileo off of his jail cell chair. But in the book of the prophet Zechariah 14:12, and this shall be the plague wherewith the Lord will smite all the people that have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh, now watch this, this is the part I'm getting to. Their flesh shall consume away while they stand on their feet, and their eyes shall consume away in their holes. Their tongues shall consume away in their mouths. Sounds like a nuclear something to me. One that Chuck Missler commonly points out would be Jeremiah 59. They will take up their positions against her, and from the north she will be captured. Their arrows will be like skilled warriors who do not return empty-handed. Now, here's the part that he's pointing out. This word arrows, if we're looking at it in the original Hebrew, this could be anything moving at a sharp speed through the air. And what Missler points out, no pun intended, is that this down here will be like skilled warriors. This is a property of the arrow, that the arrow itself being shot at cities within the arrow itself is like skilled warriors. Smart arrows going towards cities and making big booms. This right here before me and before you now is Enoch's calendar. This is the calendar that he used on the screen in its detail. This would be a pre-flood calendar, okay? And it's different than any calendar on it. Most calendars of the ancient world were 360-day calendars. In fact, you have prophecies that are where God is explaining to, the people only know the Babylonian calendar. They're living under, so he's giving you the prophecy in terms, he's always giving you the prophecy in terms that you can understand it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to understand it. But this calendar is not, we currently use a Gregorian calendar, a 365-day calendar. That's what we use today. Enoch's calendar was different. This is a 364-day calendar. Now, I'd like to point out before we get into this right here that I hear many state they'll look through Enoch and they write these pre-flood, what are said to be pre-flood texts off because of lingo that is, first of all, you're going to find the same when terms that are Old English terms, they're prophetic terms mixed with a combination of Old English terms, the four corners of the earth, these kinds of terms. Enoch is not telling you that there are four corners of the earth any more than he is telling you the earth is flat, and he is definitely not telling you that the earth is flat. When you hear terms talking about portals of the wind, the portals of the moon, portals, he's talking, this calendar comes out of chapter 3, the book of the heavenly luminaries. To not grasp these terms, I would argue and humbly submit to anyone to investigate Enoch deeper than that. You are finding a treasure chest of words that plug in from Genesis all the way to Revelation. And the last thing Enoch is doing is telling you there's portals. What Enoch has done, or more specifically and better stated, what Enoch is reporting to you that the angel has told him that is God's setup, that God wanted. He has divided the day up into He's divided the earth up into 12 parts. That's what these 12 portals are. 6 on each side, making a completion of 12. Just like you have 12 months, you had 12 disciples, you had 12 tribes of Israel, you have 12. 6 on this side, 6 on this side. 6 is also the number of man, each half having 6. Whatever the case, if the sun rises in this portal, this sector of the east, then it's going to set on the other side, this sector, this portal in the west, etc., etc. Additionally, Enoch has also divided the moon up into 14 what he would call parts. Not dissimilar to what you see here. We would call these phases, but more specifically, 7 parts on this side of the moon, 7 parts on this side of the moon. 7 and 7, 14. Additionally, I would also point out for the record that whether you're dealing with the sun or the moon, that Enoch he is indicating and stating that both of these luminaries keep their light the whole way around. His calendar is divided into 18, so these are like 80-minute hours as opposed to our 60-minute hours. Here's the underlying objective. People will get in big nail and teeth fights over, should we do a calendar this way? Should we do a calendar this way? And I would note for the record that Enoch's calendar is a solar calendar. It's keeping track of the sun, moon, and the stars. Enoch is also not just pointing out that the moon actually receives her light from the sun. He's specifically stating that in the text, but more than this, he's stating specifically in Enoch 74, I believe it is, that the sun and the stars, they're going to keep their motions with perfection till the end of, at least the end of the age, is what he's specifying. But that the moon, that her orbits will become a little bit altered as time goes on. I find it fascinating that he's stating this about the moon, and calendar systems are trickier than a lot of people truly realize. You're keeping track of a lot of moving objects out there, and on top of this, Enoch understood the movement. Those little bitty stars up there are telling the biblical story, and people knew this all the way. Nimrod knew this, and he got that because Noah knew this, and Noah knew this because Enoch knew this, and Nimrod well knew it. That's how Nimrod's witchy people knew, which we'll talk about later, how to run in and tell Nimrod about the child that was born in Terah's house was because of the signs in the stars, those little pinpoints, those little mathematical pinpoints of light. Here's what Enoch was looking at. What all those meticulous little details that go on for pages and pages and pages. All these little calculations about that calendar. Here's the underlying premise, is that he's trying to keep track of God's Sabbaths. And this is the same thing and those are what Enoch viewed, according to his text, as important. So in the pre-flood world, what it appears Enoch was doing with precision, no less, and I find that extremely compelling, is he was tracking God's, what would later become what we call today, God's Sabbath, his holy days, what fundamentally makes Israel a part of what makes Israel of distinction. And that calendar is designed to make those Sabbaths land on a predictable day, month after month, year after year. The Gregorian calendar, it won't do that. It spits God's holy days, his Sabbaths, pretty much wherever it wants to, all throughout the week. Enoch is stating that in the future, from his perspective, that they will reckon the days wrong, that they're going to get the calendar wrong. In the book of Jubilees, this is defined as adding in an abominable day. So you've got the 365 days. And he's also stating that in the future they're going to worship the celestial bodies as gods. In fact, the naming conventions that we've used for the days of the 7-day creation week are all pagan or Roman gods. By the way, on the Enoch calendar, when you have the seasons, it's both a religious and a commercial or seasonal calendar, both in one. The Jews currently today, to rectify the problem that you're seeing right here, where you've got a secular calendar, the Orthodox Jews have a separate religious calendar to track out the Sabbaths. Each month in the Enoch calendar has 30 days, except for 4 markers, 4 season markers. With each of these 4 days, which are kicking off the new season and completing the old season, Enoch calls these 4 days, each one of them, days of remembrance, days to honor God. So every month has 30 days, except for 4. At your season, every quarter has 1 extra day. This makes your 364-day year in the Enoch calendar. And with its adjustments, its God-given adjustments, which we'll peek at briefly, it appears not only functional, but extremely functional. Your calendars today, even your Gregorian or your Julian your calendars you're using right now are based on a 7-day week, and that's what Enoch's is. This 7-day week that we use right now, even while you're watching this video, that 7-day week is based on God's creation week. And on the 7th day, God rested. That's what that Sabbath is. It's a day in honor of God. And that's what Enoch is trying to do. And that's what later, under Moses, when the 10 Commandments were that the children of Israel would be instituting, that they should be following right now, and many of them are, is that they should be observing the Sabbath. And so guys can argue till they're blue in the face. Should we do a calendar this way, that way, the other way, this way, and get mad at each other and tear each other's clothes if they want to. But the bottom line is, what I see through my eyes is that you're seeing that even in that pre-flood world, just like you see in Genesis, God's importance on that Sabbath, and that a formula was given even to Enoch, who passed it on to his sons. He understood the movements of those stars, and he understood the importance of God's a day to honor God, a specific day to honor God. If we go back to the garden, our tree of knowledge of good and evil, that Adam would ultimately eat from. What God told Adam is that in the day you eat of that tree, you shall surely die. Now remember that God says that a day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day. Now, every man in that pre-flood world died, including Adam, before they hit 1,000 years old. This even extends to include Enoch's son, Methuselah, the longest living man in the biblical text, who died at 969 years, or 7 days before that flood. In Enoch 15, this is one of the spots within the book of Enoch where it's covering the origin of demons or evil spirits, some portion, at least, of the demons or evil spirits. And this is what it's stating. So you have these angels that come in, these fallen angels, they come in, they interbreed with the women, and they have offspring. That offspring is called the Nephilim. And now the giants. And this word giants, that is, this comes from a more ancient word. So much, well, this word giants, Nephilim, what this means, if you're reading in the original text, the ancient meaning of this word being rendered in English here is giants, which is fine because some portion of them were giants. But this word in its original meaning would be a whole slew of genetic abominations. And this is why context, reading the context of the passages is important, because that's what you're seeing in Enoch, is not just giants produced, some portion of them certainly were, but all sorts of things were produced that were abominations. Now the giants, the Nephilim, who have been born of spirit and flesh, shall be called upon the earth evil spirits, and on the earth shall be their habitation. Evil spirits shall proceed from their flesh. When they were created from above, from the holy watchers was their beginning and primary foundation. Evil spirits shall they be upon the earth, and the spirits of the wicked shall they be called. The habitation of the spirits of heaven shall be in heaven. That's part of what allows you and I to go to heaven, because we're in this place but not of this place, right? So we need to be the spirits of heaven shall be in heaven. But upon the earth shall be the habitation of the terrestrial spirits. Terrestrial, they're from right here, who are born on the earth. All right, so now pay attention to the word, you must be born again by Jesus, right? Number 9, the spirits of the giants, the Nephilim, this ancient battery of things, slew of genetic abominations, shall be like clouds. There's a prophetic word being poked in right there. You lose so much when you're translating the ancient texts into English, and then on top of this you've got these prophetic contexts, which shall oppress, corrupt, fall, content, and bruise upon the earth. And this is why reading the context, you can't just take a word and say clouds. The spirit of the giants shall be like clouds, demons, which shall oppress, corrupt, fall, content, and bruise upon the earth. Within Enoch, in Enoch 7 specifically, verse 12, it says whose stature, so this is talking about the giants. So these things are born little bitty babies, but they just kept growing and growing and growing. Lizards do this, anything. Well, verse 12, whose stature was each 3,000 ells. These devoured all the labor of men produced until it became impossible to feed them. Dr. Judkins, in the case of this single finger right here, so now fossilization, which is what this human finger is fossilized, that supposedly takes millions of years according to the theory, or do I have that wrong?
The only way soft tissue can be preserved is under rapid catastrophic burial. There's snails, there's worms, and there's this human fossilized finger found in the Biloxi River near Glenrose, Texas. It's a medical doctor had this CAT scanned, and basically he describes that this is indeed a human finger, probably from a female because of the taper of the finger.
So, and it goes on, these things would fight with each other, and they began eating each other, cannibalistic creatures. Now, this right here, 3,000 ells, this would translate into 450 feet. Now, I'd like to tell you two things regarding this. Number one, in the ancient world, in this pre-flood world, you're finding stuff that could not even live today. This is a titanosaur, giant lizard, the giantest thing we've found yet from the ancient world. And this is how large a modern day guy would be in comparison to this enormous animal.
These dinosaurs were buried underwater. Why? Because they're buried under sedimentary layers of geological rock. Sometimes you'll find their necks arched all the way backwards. Why is that? Because they're suffocating. And as they're being buried alive, their necks are being arched backwards as they're trying to gasp for air, and they die in an arched position with their necks backwards.
That is right here on the screen. In fact, much of this stuff couldn't even exist in today's atmosphere. It would not have. It would be impossible to feed that thing. Now, I'm not stating that dinosaurs are the creation of Satan, or that they were the product of the Nephilim, or some version of this breeding and then breeding and then breeding more stuff and breeding more stuff. Some portion of them could be. You have lots of weird stuff, but you have lots of intelligent weird stuff that you're finding on the ground, and you have weird skeletons all over the place. Bottom line, there were certain sets of instructions that Noah had to make sure that that which got on the boat was pure. Some of these large lizards and these things were vegetable-eating creatures. Many of these animals that would get on the boat. Later, they might become desperate and turn into dragons. Just like, is it like they're tumbled together and just collected into,
Yeah. What happens is these dinosaurs were buried underwater, and the dinosaurs died in a sudden flood event. Now, you'll always hear the interpretation, this was the ancient seashore, this was the edge of the seashore, then the dinosaurs died, and, they were buried over by a slow-moving stream, and then fossilization occurred. Really, because I don't see that happening with cows out in the pasture.
You see with animals today. A man that I highly respect, Dr. Walter Veith, who is professor, used to be a hardcore teaching evolution atheist, the kind of guy that would make Richard Dawkins look like a puppy dog. This guy would eat you alive. And I had an epiphany that changed everything. Bottom line, some of his research that he did on animals and their diets, actually experimenting with how the animals become much healthier, even meat-eating animals that otherwise would seem like carnivores.
It's called the death pose, and we see a lot of dinosaurs dying in this death pose.
So they're gasping for air, is what you're literally seeing in the rocks under the ground, that the animal is trying to breathe.
Exactly, and that's why they're arched like that. In many cases, they arch so far backwards it's broken their necks and their backs. Sudden death site in Waco, Texas, is a good evidence for that. This is a mammoth that was being buried, an adult mammoth. And what happened was, as these mammoths were being buried, there's one particular adult mammoth raised a juvenile mammoth up on his tusk to try to keep him out of the mud as they were sinking. And they died like that. The juveniles up on the tusk, the adults trying to keep it up out of the floodwaters and the mud, and they're dying in this position.
When they're fed proper diets of fruits and vegetables, non-meat diets, even dealing with carnivores. Now, when you think about something like a black bear, you think to yourself, this is a terrifying animal that you don't want running at you at full speed, and you'd be right on that. But the truth is, most of that guy's diet is plants and beautiful little berries, and hanging and playing loose with the little bitty sleepy baby bears. Now, when you take away the Garden of Eden style food source, where everything has its perfect balance, and the food is just right there in front of you, and you don't have to go chase it or hunt it down or go run after it because it doesn't want to be eaten. When you take away that lush Garden of Eden food source, a guy can start to look like that, especially after time. And just because something has the equipment to kill doesn't necessarily make it a killer. In fact, you look at a T-Rex, and people were writing about these things in the ancient, dragons, and they're attacking the villages, and you're looking at a desperate animal. Look at the body size of that creature. How hard do you think it would be for that T-Rex to catch a deer or a gazelle? And he's got to eat a couple of these a day. Of course, bears always get thought of as the old classic imagery of out there catching the trout, but trout season only lasts for a small portion of the year. Most of the year, this guy here is hanging loose, chewing on berries, and I think that's pretty well where he, or his ancient version, his ancient perfect, in balance, in harmony version, would really like to be. Despite these factors that in the ancient world everything was the size plus times 10 and sometimes times 100 and sometimes times 1,000, this right here most scholars believe as I tend to believe, that this right here, this actually would read 300 L's. This is a mistranslation of it's a rough translation of the text, and which would equate to 35, 36 feet. And you find bones that would support this on the ground. In fact, you've got bones for giants all over the place. Right here's an article for horn skulls that are found. You have all sorts of madness running loose, but giants are certainly there. Certainly agrees with the text. And again, reading the context of the text and how large the giants were, that's why I tend to believe that this, though there were animals that probably, most certainly, we got the evidence for it, are this size, they're creatures that are that size. These fallen angels are apparently making a slew of things genetically, so maybe Enoch was stated, but I think what Enoch was stating here was about 35 feet. Shh, let me tell you a secret. The most colorful things on this planet, the valuable stuff, does not end up in your museums. It ends up in the palaces of all Earth. And that doesn't mean dead dinosaur bones or dusty old skeletons of dead giants, though those can look impressive as a party favor in a spare room of the house. And you're beginning to see more and more things that are harder to keep a lid on get pulled out from underneath the ground. But the empires of Earth they've always known. Look, nobody at the top believes that evolution. That's a story for the Goyim, and everybody knows that. The grave-funded nonsense. The real artifacts that are fascinating on this planet are all pre-flood, and that would be in two places: underneath the ground and underneath the ice. Ask yourself this question: if on just the edges of the ice, and this is a artist rendering of mammoths from Russia, if just on the edge of the ice you're pulling out a whole nother world, freshly preserved underneath that ice, well, gee, I wonder what other kind of things might have been looked for, searched for, even found, historically speaking, other than ancient pre-flood elephants, deeper underneath that ice, way out there by the poles. I'll shut up there. There are a variety of prophetic terms and specific little keywords that are used in the book of Enoch. In fact, the text is rich with them. I want to go over four of these. The four biggest ones, these are prophetic words. The first one I'd like to go over is this word winds. You see the word winds used a lot by Enoch, or a term chamber of the winds. Now, I'd like for just a second, let's hit pause on Enoch's use of the word winds, and let's go to Jesus Christ. When one of the Pharisees came to Jesus by night because he didn't want anyone to see that he was going to Jesus. This was Nicodemus. And Jesus tells this Pharisee who is not to see him under the cover of night, he tells him that he must be born again. That's the key. And Nicodemus says, well, how can that be? How can a man go back into the womb and be born again? And Jesus replies to this, and he says, very truly, I tell you, no one can enter the kingdom of God unless they are born of water and spirit. Flesh gives birth to flesh, and spirit gives birth to spirit. So do not marvel that I say you must be born again. Now listen to this next sentence. Winds. Remember winds. Does the wind not blow wherever it pleases? You can hear its sound, but ye neither know from where it comes or to whence it goes. I tell you, so also is everyone who is born of spirit. Nicodemus says, how can these things be? And Jesus replies to the prestigious Pharisee who has snuck to see him at night, how can this be? That's his words. And Jesus replies, are you not teacher of all Israel? And yet you do not know these simple things? Now, this word winds, so if we're talking about, and it was moved by the winds, or the chamber of the winds, any of these prophetic terminologies in this word that gets reduced down to our English word winds is talking about elements from a spiritual dimension, a dimension running. Much of Enoch is dealing with things that are on the other side of the reality that you see with your eyes. You see the effect of something, like Jesus is stating, you feel the effect of the wind, but you can't see the wind or what's moving it or how it's moving, but you can feel it, you can tell its direction even. And in truth, in science, we write in all sorts of invisible stuff, dark matter, dark energy, dark this, dark that, all sorts of things that we can't really find in order to get these things to work in their precision orders. What Enoch is telling you is that there is an entire dimension of elements. That's where these prophetic words like winds come from. Now, how about clouds? See, words like clouds, the giants who threw themselves onto the clouds. This word clouds can mean a demonic clouds, chaos, confusion, the demonic that threw themselves or came forth in the clouds. There was a cloudiness coming forth. Now, it doesn't always mean that. On the subject of clouds, when the Hebrews saw a cloud in the sky, and this symbolism can even be used in one's personal life. If there are clouds surrounding a situation or a haziness, a confusion, an uncertainty, when the Hebrews saw a cloud, the symbol was, don't move. When there are clouds, stand right where you are. And when God's ready for you to move, the sign will be abundantly clear. Now, and one more thing about the winds. Winds winds can have a negative connotation, or they can have, see, when you're dealing with the spiritual dimension, you have both God acting and you have the devil acting. Winds are often correlated with the prince of the air. Not all the time, because it's a spiritual dimension. God owns all of this. Lucifer has a temporary lease, so often he's called the prince of the air. He's the prince. He has to ask the king's permission to do anything. But he is the prince, so sometimes he gets something approved. The winds can refer to the good and the bad on the spiritual side of reality, but commonly refer to the movement of large bodies within this place. Whether you have people moving or whether you have a planet moving, that there is a spiritual dimension that is the true mechanism behind that body or entity and its movements. That's what's being stated in Enoch. And throughout your prophetic text. Now, when you deal with stars, how about stars? You hear this word stars. In Enoch, sometimes the stars become as lightning. Well, what could that mean? Because, and you read it in your English, in your watered down English translation. Here again, no insult. It's a very fine text in its form. I saw Satan fall as lightning. Stars are commonly correlate with angels. So you have literal stars, And you also have the reference to angels as stars. Now, another fascinating thing about these two bodies is that in Enoch, he seems to be conveying that the stars actually represent angels. And you see these words, such as star, used interchangeably for the word angels. Now, that runs us directly into parable. Now, this is a real big one. Jesus often spoke in parables. Enoch begins by saying, I took up my parable. I took up my life. Okay? He viewed his life in this place as a parable. Okay? He viewed it as something much smaller than the larger thing that was behind the scenes, right? So you got the planetary body, right? But you can't see the winds that are pushing it, okay? You can't see the clouds that are surrounding it and keeping from what it should really be able to see with its eyes open. You can't see these prophetic terms will plug in. Now, Jesus spoke often in these parables. But he was very often in these parables, it seemed like he was telling actual stories about actual people and actual events. But yet, Jesus was relaying these as, but let me tell you a story of how this turned out for this guy. Let me tell you a parable and its outcome. See, just like the stars are a symbolic representation of something larger, which would be an angel in the text, what Enoch is seeing in his own life is that his life here is a symbolic representation of who he is or who he will be in another place. And it's in this place where he's making the decisions. In this place here, he's making little decisions, which are the test for something larger. This right here on the screen is from section 3 of the book of Enoch, the book of the courses of the heavenly luminaries. And I would bring to the attention that many of the sections, particularly this portion, but all through the book of Enoch, many of these sections not directly stating that they are dimensional in their scope, but almost seem as if Enoch is describing the earth and other celestial bodies as if he is looking at them from above. Here's how that section begins. So every few years on Enoch's calendar, with its 364 days up here, every few years, so every 4 years or every 5 years, and this is, since it's a lunar calendar, which deals with the sun, the moon, and the stars. So he's trying to track all of these objects and still get precision. If I'm understanding Enoch's calendar, his very technical description properly, every few years he is inserting in 7 days in honor of God. The book of the courses of the luminaries of the heavens, the relations of each according to their classes, their dominions, and their seasons, which Uriel, the holy angel who was with me, who is their guide. The name Uriel means God is my light. In Enoch 74:11 through 17, he appears to be, he's actually giving the mathematics, for he understands that the cycles, the movements, the lunar movements are make a shorter year than what the calendar requires. So this is in the religious calendar right now for the Hebrews, makes provisions for this. My point is this, is they're a model of the festivals and Sabbaths. They're a model from before that flood, a perfect model from before that flood of what would be carried out by the Levitical order of the priests, which is all pointing to Jesus Christ. That's what that calendar is. But bottom line, it appears to be upon those phases of the moon, which she is watching and observing, that he makes the mathematical the interpolation to pop in his 7 days. Showed unto me, and he showed me all their laws exactly as they are. And watch this. Going all the way in, pressing in is pressing to Jesus Christ. That's the bullseye at the center of that. It's designed to work with God's Sabbaths. Feast days is a loose translation as well. These are appointment days with God. And how it is with regard to all the years of the world till the, watch this word right here, new creation is accomplished. What I'm telling you is this: when you're looking at Enoch's calendar, you're looking at his day planner for the day that he has appointments with God. And this new creation lasts how long? Which endureth for all eternity. That is a bold statement in those texts. What you're seeing, what's being covered there in the book of Enoch, is that before the flood, of course, you have a fall of mankind that occurs in the garden. Now, Enoch doesn't cover that, but what you're getting, Enoch is covering beginning with Enoch. He was the 7th from Adam. So, and Enoch was not, for God took him. That's a passage from Genesis. And Enoch was raptured out of this place. And Enoch is affiliating himself not with the elect, this group that's going to be coming, but he's affiliating himself with the group that is this righteous, the group that the church group. He's identifying himself with that group. Now, Enoch, one other thing that I'd like to point out is that he was the 7th from Adam. His name means teaching, and that's what Jesus came down doing, right? Is he came down teaching. But Enoch was raptured out of this place. And now Enoch would have been pre-flood, right? He wasn't post-flood or mid-flood. He was actually pre-flood. He was raptured before the flood came and took them all away. So the judgment was coming, and he was raptured prior to. In fact, Hebrew, which is what the text is originally written in, is it's the tongue of angels and men. This is the language that Adam would have spoken, that Enoch would have spoken. Some version of Hebrew, not dissimilar to the version of Hebrew. Let me explain to you. Hebrew is unlike any language on earth. In fact, what Hebrew is similar to scientific descriptions of things. That's what the words actually are. There it says, and God spoke. Now, in Hebrew tradition, what you have is in the beginning of Genesis, it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, all of it. In that statement, the first thing God is, he's creating the Aleph and the Bet. Okay, so the alphabet. So, and this was the Hebrew words. Okay, so, and the words are a description. Just like in science, you can have a scientific description of something. Let me give you an example. If I've got water, well, our scientific description for that is going to be H2O, right? So, you've got 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. Now, and it's scientific, so I'm actually giving a description of what it is. The same thing in Hebrew is you're actually getting description. So the Hebrew word for man, which would be Adam, right there, Adam on the screen, that this word that you're stating, this word has a connection to God. Okay, and you're being told that man was made in the image of God. So when men are dealing with demons or devils or fallen angels, any of this other stuff, if they go off and they run and they chase the little things, they're actually lessening themselves. And now God says that our wisdom here, our righteousness here, is as rags before him. This is why we need Jesus. But this is why also we're being asked to be holy, set apart from this place. Man's will and the devil's will are synonymous. They are one and the same. But this name, Adam, and your Hebrew word for human, man, person, its Hebrew word is connected to the word for God. Now, if you look at the name of an animal in Hebrew, right? So your dog would be a monkey, right? Monkey. They're teaching in the universities that you come from monkeys. No, that's certainly not a part of man's definition. Man's definition is connected to God. The animal's definition means it is what it is. It's just what it is. It's nothing more. It's not connected to God. It's not. It is, but in its definition, it just is what it is, and that's all it is. So we are getting more and more distant from God, and that's what's happening in the hours that you live in. So the world is, everything here, contrary to theories like that of evolution, or theories like you're going to hear in the occult, which are hand in hand, where you got order is going to get better and better from chaos. That's not what we see. What we see is that over time, things are beginning to fall more and more apart. And they actually fall apart right in line with click, 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 what the prophecies are telling you. But as the world declines and you see order just going out the window, what you're literally watching is that we're getting further and further away. And this was even during the time of Enoch. What he's covering is that after that fall of mankind, that a set of angels made entrance. There are different views on this. This group of angels, it's not my belief that Lucifer is amongst this group. This is a set that decided to make entrance to this place. And what they did when they made entrance to this place is they wanted to birth their own children. They wanted to do something that they could not have in the heavens. What Jesus stated is that when we die, we're like the angels in heaven. The angels in heaven are neither married nor are they given in marriage. So what these angels did, and specifically what's being stated in Enoch and God's judgment on these angels, is that they're doing something that the angels in heaven are not supposed to do. And when they made entrance to this place, they were having some kind of trouble communicating with. They were not able to talk to God. So they apparently entered here with all the proper apparatus to do what they were going to do. And at this point, something changed for these guys that are on the screen. So there were 200 of them, 200 angels. And this one up here is the one that is going to be covered the most. He's going to get the strongest indictment. God says, ascribe the entire sin, the bulk of the crime, ascribe it to Azazel. And these angels are going to, ultimately, they're going to be put Tartarus. This is as far beneath hell as the earth is underneath heaven. That's what this is. This is the underneath hell place that they're being put. So there's hell, and then there's where the angels were put. Now, Azazel, what he did, and he's nicknamed, if you were reading Jewish, even if you were reading in the Talmud, whether it be the Babylonian or and I do not, or the Kabbalah, I do not recommend, these are occult texts. These are not recommended texts. But in any Jewish tradition, Azazel, this is where you get the name the scapegoat. That's what his nickname is. Or right there in Leviticus 16, 8 through about 10, which is the time period. All of these laws that you're going to read in Leviticus, many of which get made fun of very hard. They work so hard to attack those.
2 discs, 3 or 4 hours on each disc, just documenting all this stuff. It really is staggering to get into. But another guy who's really of note to consider here was Matthew Maury, who is he's widely regarded as the father of modern oceanography. When he moved to the naval office, many of the charts that people were using were up to 100 years old. I mean, there had just been very little that was done in this field. But Maury was the first to actually systematically and thoroughly analyze them. It was a pretty untouched field overall. And Maury, being a devout Christian and a strong proponent of the notion that Scripture and science were wholly compatible, began to really look into it in earnest. And the result, the cartography work that he did and the extensive charts that he developed were directly instrumental in turning the U.S. into a maritime powerhouse. And so this was pretty essential knowledge. Anyone who had this knowledge and had this understanding would very quickly establish some degree of dominance on the seas, and Matthew Maury was the reason for that. And a large part of his inspiration was Psalms chapter 8.
Right out of Leviticus, when dealing with disease, clothes and body should be washed under running water. For centuries, in fact, until recently, people, even doctors, were naive about washing the hands. They would use standing water in bowls, in basins, in whatever they had, but standing water. Not recognizing, many people died because in medical application, particularly during the Middle Ages, this, what would otherwise seem simple and straightforward today, because we understand these as scientific realities, those passages that they were following, given to them by God, and it's specifically starting by saying when dealing with disease, clothes and body should be washed.
Really, you have this time period where people were very ignorant about germ theory. People didn't really know this, and yet it was totally unnecessary if you go by Levitical law, because it has a lot to say in terms of being near people who are sick, and it even prescribes washing your hands with running water. Okay, running water. It doesn't just say dip it in a bowl, which was the common practice. Some people will say, oh, well, they wash their hands. Yeah, you dipped it in a bowl and then passed the bowl on to the next person, and he washed his hands too. Still no concept of germs actually being, and pathogens actually physically being on your hands. And so the Bible prescribes using running water to wash your hands.
Deuteronomy 23, he's telling them that they each should carry with them a shovel so that they can bury their waste, to dig a hole and bury their waste. Up until World War I, more soldiers died from disease than from the war because they did not isolate their human waste, bury their human waste, get rid of it, and not just put it in a pile somewhere, but actually bury it and get it under the ground.
And burying it specifically tells us to do that in Levitical law, where it has a lot to say about what foods are clean and what foods are unclean. And a lot of people think that's just totally ceremonial or whatever. I used to think that way too, until I started seeing scientific studies about how toxic pork really is. Pork is extremely toxic. They're tasty critters, no doubt about it, but there's are voluminous scientific studies on how toxic these animals really are. So, the Bible uses the word unclean, but hey, this stuff really is unhealthy. The same thing with crustaceans and shellfish. The bulk of the creatures that are referred to as unclean animals or unclean food to eat actually are nature's bottom feeders. They're nature's vacuum cleaners, if you will, that clean up the garbage and refuse. So it's really not a major leap in logic to make the connection.
It is extensively telling you in the Bible that life is in the blood. Starting in Genesis, the book of genes is. But taking that a step deeper in terms of the blood and scientific application, I mean, you had people drinking blood all throughout history. Those in the occult are still doing it. But in Leviticus 17, it's telling you that the source of life and health is in the blood. Throughout the Middle Age, and doctors did not know this until not long back. In the Middle Ages, part of medical practice was to bleed people who were sick, which would make them more sick. They believed that maybe you had too much blood, so what they would do is bleed you. And of course, this would ultimately weaken you, i.e., kill you. Millions of people have probably died from those medical practices that could have been prevented by that one passage.
It's great to be alive at a time where that's common knowledge and you can Google that, but the Bible was telling us to do that long before all these theories were trotted out and all these regulations were written. You see it reflected in health department standards too. You know, if anyone who's run a restaurant knows that there's all these very rigid and stringent laws in place. You know, if you're trying to run an honest business, it doesn't matter how good your food is and how good your service is. If the health department walks in at the wrong time and they find you in violation of a certain thing, they can just shut you down like that. I mean, they don't play around with this stuff. And, you know, many years ago, that would have just been considered superstition. It would have been unthinkable to shut down someone's place of business because of something you can't even see. And here again, you have that, you know, all being alluded to in Levitical law.
Or how about one of the sacrifices, for example, like the red heifer sacrifice. Not only are these sacrifices pointing to the ultimate sacrifice, which would be Jesus Christ. And by the way,
and they would place them on the goat's head. Now, whichever plaque had God's sacred name on it, they would place that right on the goat's head. And that was the goat that would be sacrificed for the sin of the nation, for the Israel on Yom Kippur. So that goat there would have God's name put right above it, right on the crown of its head. They'd place that. The other goat would be taken, that's the Azazel. The Azazel would be taken out to the wilderness. And there's a lot of misconception. They thought, a lot of Christian scholarship thought that the goat was set free. Azazel is actually the name of a place they took the goat to, and the goat was actually dropped off a high cliff and killed. And it's very significant why they did that.
Okay, tell me about that. I had thought that too. When Jesus Christ came into the temple and they were buying and selling the sacrifices is what they were doing. It's not just that they had turned the temple into a flea market. That's a giant part of the problem. But more than that, the sacrifice, this had to be the best of what they had, and something that they had raised and brought to lay down, the best of what they had. So it had to be something that meant something to them. They were laying down, that was the entrance fee. They were laying down something that cost them something, that it had a real, not just a couple of pigeons that they paid a couple of bucks for, and here, God, you're appeased. Instructions that God gave, precise instructions for how the Hebrews were to do things, the holy way to do things, which is going to match with the scientific way every single time. The Egyptians, they were being told by their gods as well how to do things. And many of their medicines, if not most, if not all of them that I can find, were mixed with urine, were mixed with feces, were mixed with human urine and feces, were mixed with the blood of animals that they were drinking. See, when those dark gods are giving you spiked medication, or the master Hilarion behind the scenes, who is handing you his fix, That's symbolic in and of itself. You don't want to drink what he's got. Red heifer, the priest, was to sprinkle blood 7 times, always the number. It's this number of 7. That's God's number of complete. That's his perfect number. The priest was to sprinkle the blood 7 times in front of the tabernacle. The red heifer was burnt, skin, flesh, and blood, and all the innards. Put some of the ashes from the burnt purification offering into a jar and poured fresh water over them. Now, here's the fun part. Question is this: what do you get when you mix animal and wood ashes, water, and rendered fat? You get lye soap, one of the most powerful antibacterial cleansing agents known to man. And what about the cedar wood oil? You not only get antibacterial and fungicide, and that oil not only has healing effects, but you get an incredibly good smelling and fragrant, potent lye soap. That's a scientific description. That's only one. We could go through 100 of these. But not only do these have scientific applications when you really hone down and look at these, but you're looking at things that all point to Jesus Christ.
You can read about this and this isn't even in Christian literature. This is in Jewish literature, and this is in Jewish literature that does not believe Yeshua is the Messiah. So you got to understand the significance of that. These people don't think Yeshua was the Messiah. So anyways, during Yeshua's time, after they placed lots on the goats, the high priest would take a length of crimson dyed wool, red, and he put it between the horns of the scapegoat.
Beginning in verse 8, and Aaron shall cast lots over the 2 goats, one for the Lord and the other for Azazel. And Aaron shall present the goat on which the lot fell for the Lord as the sin offering, representing Jesus Christ who's coming.
So these lengths of wool were specifically dyed crimson. And they got that from, though your sins are scarlet, they shall be white as snow. Though they shall be red as crimson, they shall be white as wool. That's from Isaiah chapter 1, verse 18. Now a similar piece of wool would be tied around the neck of the goat that's to be sacrificed. So you have 2 pieces of wool, and both red. There was a miracle that would take place. So when that sacrifice was done, the scapegoat, like when it reaches destination in the desert, and it was cast off the cliff, the red cord around the goat that was still in the temple would turn white, and it would happen right before the eyes of everyone standing there. It was a miracle. This is all written within ancient Jewish texts, in the Mishnah and the Talmud, which would...
Many believe that Azazel is just another word for Lucifer or Satan, and they could well be correct on that. He's teaching the arts of violence and war, so that was important to him. He's teaching the women to be objects of seduction. At bare minimum, Azazel he's one of the top dog goats, a lieutenant in the dark armies. He is one of the fallen angels who gets the bulk of the sin of the 200 fallen angels that made entrance before the flood. He is the angel that God says ascribe the entire sin to Azazel. He is also teaching the value of the precious minerals or the precious stones, i.e. gold. Now, if you think about gold for a second, all the kings of the earth, both before and after the flood, certainly no after the flood, that's how they tally up their worth, right? Is how much gold they've got. Well, and gold is a rare substance, and it is shiny, and I guess it's sort of pretty, but it serves no purpose. Never did. back to now in this modern age, you can make some computer circuit boards with it. We can do a few things like that. But in a practical sense, there's really nothing you can do. You can cover some things with it and make them a little shinier, but in truth, there's a lot of much easier to work with substances. So who came up with this idea that the gold had any value whatsoever? Well, Azazel was teaching the value of the precious minerals, that this little chunk of shiny rock here is more valuable than the sheep on 1,000 hills. That doesn't even make common practical sense. What he's teaching are the illusory systems of power, that there would become imbalance, also called the scapegoat. And the effects of what Azazel did are like an echo growing louder and louder today, a snowball rolling forward to this very day in the trade. There would become imbalance in how people were able to deal with each other, because one would have power over the other because I got a little shiny stuff. God certainly uses gold in many of the holy items, such as the Ark of the Covenant. In fact, I have this strange suspicion that the temple that was to be built on earth is a feeble, man-created rags version of something much larger. It's in the heavens. But God does in his instructions for many of the holy items before God, these symbolic items before God, use gold as one of the precious stones, which is, I'm sure, where Azazel got the idea from, where he had come from previously.
Now here's the amazing thing. Recorded in the Talmud itself, it talks about and this is during the time, and this is found in the Yoma, you can look this up in the Talmud, that did you know around the time that Yeshua appeared on the earth, that red cord stopped turning white. It turned white for hundreds of years, my friend. But when Yeshua came on the scene, it is recorded in Jewish documents outside of the Bible that would in no way would they write to do you see why this evidence is so strong? Because they would never do anything that would promote Yeshua as being Messiah. But you think about this. For hundreds of years, Trey, that they done this, that red cord turned white. Every time when that goat hit the bottom out in the wilderness at Azazel, the goat's red cord in the temple turned white. But when Yeshua come on the scene, the Jews recorded in their own writings, they don't know what happened. They stopped turning white. It stayed red. That meant that it was going to change the sacrifice, which was going to be Yeshua.
What he was fundamentally doing in all of these things was he was making the world altered. Following the flood, you have there from the bloodline that comes from Ham, you're going to get Nimrod. This is the same bloodline that's going to lead through the little Gilgamesh down there now, whose father was the unseen one, because they were beckoning in the little spirits, the demons, or the great god Nothing, the top dog of devils, the great king of demons, the old dimensional goat behind the scenes, serpent in hand. You can call him Pan, you can call him, he goes by so many names. Enki, the unseen one, Zeus, Ra, there's the sun disk behind his head for Ra. Horns mean horns don't necessarily equal the devil. Horns are a symbol of power or authority. In this case, he's holding the serpent in his hand. That was his ticket into the door, right? So he's got that in his hand. He's happy about that. The old goat. That's what the Tower of Babel is, that we're trying to rebuild in this modern age, where we're trying to build our technological Tower of Babel with the one world leader that will come forth. And that's what Nimrod, this is a recreation. What we're recreating today is identical to what was before that flood. Jesus said, so is in the days of Noah, so also shall it be in the day of the coming of the Son of Man. One thing I'd like to point out about that passage, most people interpret that passage as meaning some calamities coming, the Amaro's coming, the banking system's going to collapse, the Islamic people are moving in, they're going to slit your throat, all of these different things. And all of those things are, it's true, it's getting bad out there. So you got all these specific little bad, but in the days of Noah, that passage goes on. These are Jesus' words I'm quoting. This isn't Enoch. This isn't anybody. This isn't a man. This isn't any one of the prophets. This is Jesus. They were eating and drinking and marrying. And then the flood came. They thought everything was okay. They seemed to think that things were improving. In fact, Noah was out there in the book of Yasher. Noah was out there for 120 years. 120 years. He was building his boat, but he would go in and he would preach to them, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And then in the end, and they were laughing at him. Oh, that crazy old man. He's coming up in here again. And he kept saying, the hour's at hand. The hour's at hand. For 120 years, the hour was at hand. For 120 years. No, that crazy old guy. He's coming in here. The guy building the stupid boat. They all knew about the boat. Right? So he's out there diligently working on the boat. There's no sign that this is going to happen, other than the fact that God told him this. And that his forefather Enoch had prophesied of these things. And Methuselah, his name means his death shall bring. His death shall bring the judgment. So the Methuselah died 7 days before. When Methuselah died, it was on.
Whoa, look at that. What is... Whoa! Holy moly! Wow!
Noah was out there building, and then after 120 years, and they were laughing, and you're stupid, but when the day came and the waters began to fall from the skies, they were getting intense. This is in the book of Jasher, how it's covered. And the animals that weren't taken were all surrounding that boat. So the boat was in the middle. Noah was given specific instructions by God what to take. Take the animals and their kinds. God had given him those instructions are fascinating, by the way, from a scientific perspective. But he's there, and there's lots of animals still around the boat, and the people are coming, and the rain is coming down harder and harder, and they're screaming to Noah from the ground, let us on the boat, let us on the boat. And Noah comes forth from that window that's described in Genesis at the top of the boat, and he hollers down to them, where were your fears 120 years ago when I told you to repent, that this day was at hand? But yet now you're standing out here and you're screaming to get in a safe place. And let us on the boat. Noah yells back to them, I don't think that's the way this is happening. You're not getting on this boat. So they ran inwards like a horde coming at the boat. And at that moment, the floodwaters came in intense. The animals kicked outward.
Look at that red. Holy cow. Now that's got to be making sound.
And chaos went every direction. And it says at that point, the boat began spiraling upwards. And it says that every creature on board cried out in its own tongue. And Noah, gripping on in that boat with his family, was holding on as the boat's rising. And he said, Lord, please remember us. Please remember me, your servant. And the next sentence reads, and God remembered Noah, and the boat rested peacefully atop the waters. That you would have these giants and things that they're describing in the text. So where does this come from after the flood? There were some that will conjecture that there was Nephilim blood on the boat of Noah. I could not more strongly disagree with this. And here's why. Because number one, this is like stating that God doesn't know what he's doing, that he doesn't have control of the sons or the wives that they're going to choose, because the theory will often go that the blood's in one of the wives slipped through a little bit of Nephilim blood onto the boat. God had his hand. If you're reading the book of Jasher, the book of the upright, it's telling you that not only the animals show up in mass, but God gave specific directions to know on which ones to choose. So who would possibly believe that God did not have his hands on those sons and the wives that they had and that they chose and who got on that boat? If he had his hand on every animal that got on there and said, Noah, this is how you're going to pick them, do you think he did not have his hand on those sons and those wives and give them a perfect start? It is us. It says in that text in Genesis 6:4, what it's stating. There were Nephilim in the earth in those days, pre-flood, and then also afterwards. That means between there wasn't any. So how did it get back? Well, the answer to that question is that it's covered right there in Enoch, and it's covered in your Bible. And the pagan texts are screaming it right here. I'm looking at a portion of the Sumerian Kings list, which of course covers the flood. Gilgamesh, whose father was the unseen one. That's a reference, of course, that's a reference to Satan, ruled for 126 years. What they're doing and what man has the authority to do, given by God. What the entities that are behind the scenes, the demons, the devils, all of these little creepy guys, what they want is they want permission. They need man's see, before the flood in Enoch, what it's stating is that these angels, they knew that they were going to be punished. They did not know how hard. I don't think they anticipated, well, they certainly didn't anticipate how hard. It says that they were screaming out. They asked Enoch to go before God and pray for them, and they were calling him a scribe of righteousness, which is what God also called Enoch. They understood that this man knew God, and they said, go in and pray for us. And when Enoch went before God, God told him, he said, those angels are to be praying for men, not men for them. Go deliver to them that their prayers will not be answered, and that their judgment will be for all eternity. All eternity. They must have understood what that meant, because they were screaming. We here as human beings, we think these are games, but those angels were terrified. Those big, evil, scary, fallen angels that we down here we talk to, and the people in their little empires and stuff, they get their little crystal balls together, and we just want to talk. They're certainly not smart. You're talking something that's condemned, that needs your help. And somehow that's going to work. I mean, that thing can't even help itself. And it's going to help you. It's just thrilled to death somebody will even talk to it and give it the time of day. I mean, it's thrilled to. There's nobody listening to it. But the guy sitting there with a crystal ball. Oh, looky, I've talked to something. I don't mean to be facetious about that, but those angels knew what it meant. While we play games, while mankind was playing games before that flood, those angels sure knew what that meant when God said, you're done. This is Nimrod. He was married to Semiramis or Semiramis. Okay, and she, according to legend, worked at, she actually worked the local tavern. She was the head waitress there. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that's according to legend. She became the goddess. Right? So you got Nimrod and Semiramis. Now, it's my belief that Gilgamesh was following the union of these two. That's debatable. So it's, looking at this ancient history, it's, you got to pick through little details. Anyhow, that's just my speculation and my belief, and I could give you strong cause, but there's not the time for it. Nimrod is your first little king and first little tower builder. Now, I'm going to explain to you the story behind Nimrod as according to the text of the book of Yasher, or the book of the upright. This is a Hebrew text. It's like a documentary style version of exactly what you're reading in Genesis. I would never hold it to biblical canon, but I do believe the text is accurate. Abram, whose name would become Abraham, this was Terah's son. Terah would be the head idol maker. He's the head, and this is in either Genesis or the book of Yasher. Just getting expanded version. Terah was the head idol maker for Nimrod. And Nimrod's witch doctors, the priests, his demon summonsers, and that's even what they're called. Okay, everybody. These people understood by the stars that a special child was going to be born, and from that child would conquer basically the empires of darkness, or the bloodline of that child. So they went to go pay tribute, the priests and the demon worshippers and all of these guys, the Nimrod. They went to go pay homage because everybody understood the stars and what they meant. The zodiac above tells the biblical story. Some of these little demon worshiper guys, little pagan priests, they went to Nimrod and they said, wait, a child's been born in Terah's house. It's a very special child. But you need to kill this child, king, because if this child is allowed to live, he's going to overthrow your whole empire, your whole system. Nimrod took this to mean immediately. But this is what the signs coming from the goat were predicting. So Nimrod goes into Terah and says, Terah, look, let me pay you off with a bunch of gold and stuff to kill your kid. That's what he did. It's about as straightforward as it is. Terah didn't want to kill his son, and there's this complex set of issues. The long and the short of it is, he hid Abram, and this is what ended up happening to Abram. Abram was ultimately sent, after a series of events, he was sent to go live up in the mountains with Noah and Shem. He was learning from Noah and Shem. Okay, so this bloodline that would lead to the elect, right, coming through Enoch, right, coming ultimately through Adam, who was a son of God. Okay, now, and also in the text, when you're reading B'nai Ha-Elohim, which means son of God, okay, that's how we translate it. When you're looking in the Greek, and okay, when God says, to which of the angels did I call my son? Okay, this word, B'nai Ha-Elohim, you could apply this same word in truth. You could also apply it to Adam because it's more like an attribute. Now, it does not mean, I'm not meaning to state that these two things mean the same thing. They do not. But the word B'nai Ha-Elohim most directly means a direct creation of God. That's what the angels are, and that's what Adam was. Now, Adam is something different than those angels. This was just like Jesus is a son of God. Okay? So when God says, to which of the angels did I call my son, there's something intrinsically special about mankind that is different than those angels. Abram goes to live with Noah and Shem. And so also after Abram, but also Isaac, until Noah died, and then it would just be Shem. And then Shem would ultimately die. But Abram, Isaac, and Jacob, and Jacob, of course, his name was changed to Israel, because he's the father of the 12 sons, which would become the 12 tribes of Israel, which ultimately would lead through the line of the tribe of Judah, which would lead directly through to Jesus Christ. And the artifacts for all of this, the artifacts for all of the cities, the sites, and everything that are listed in that Bible, as well as that book of Jasher, are all there. There's almost nothing that has not been found. So Abram lives with Noah and Shem, and he learns from them. And then he comes back later. Nimrod doesn't know who he is. He thinks that kid that he paid for it to be killed, he paid Terah to kill this kid. He thought that kid was dead because that's what Terah told him. So when Abram comes back, nobody knows who he is. Well, Nimrod, the most important guy, doesn't know who he is. Well, Abram's father is the head idol maker for the king who's making the tower. So Abram decides to test his father's theory because his father has all of the idols of the gods around. So Abram comes in and he brings a sacrifice for the gods and lays it out amongst the idols. And he's sitting there and he's waiting and nothing happens. So then he decides to destroy all of the idols with an axe, except for one, the largest of the idols. And he leaves that idol there, and he puts the axe that he used to cut the other ones up in its hand. And he goes off, and Terah comes in, and then the other guys that own these idols as well, all little demon worshippers and summoners and all this, they come in, and they see that their idols are destroyed, and they're mad, they're tearing their clothes. They go to Nimrod. Nimrod brings Abram in, and he says, what have you done? You've destroyed the idols. You've destroyed the gods. And Abram says, no, my king, what are you saying? Nimrod said, are you saying that you didn't do this? You didn't destroy these idols? And Abram says, no, of course not. I brought an offering, but I only had enough for one. I set it down in the middle of them. The little ones all jumped for it. And the large one took its axe and it hacked them all up. And now what you see is where it stands. And the king says to him, he says, do you think I'm stupid enough to believe that? What you're telling me? And Abram responds to the king, King Nimrod, king of all earth, and says, my king, you say that what I've told you is foolish, but yet you tell the men of all earth that these idols made of wood and stone, that these idols are the gods that created the heavens and the earth. How foolish are you, my king, and yet you don't believe what little I just told you? But yet you say this. And this perplexed Nimrod that he would say such a thing. But his enchanters, his little witchy people came in. They say, you've got to kill him because he's insulted all of us. We have to kill him. So Nimrod decides, and with the way they did things back then, and notice this is following the flood. This is the way that it occurs following the flood. This would also happen to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Nimrod is going to have him thrown into the fire, the fiery furnace. And also Haran, the brother of Abraham, is going to be thrown into that fire too. They're going to be thrown in together. And this is why ultimately Abram would feel a burden to take care of Haran's son, Lot, which would have its own set of troubles later. But they were both thrown into the fire together because Nimrod discovered, you have to read the text to get the bottom of this, but he discovers in the process of having Abram in custody that he is in fact the child that should have been killed a long time ago that he already paid Terah for. And Terah even is wimpy about it. And these people are all wimps. Abram gets thrown into the fire. Now, Haran, his brother, burns up like that. Abram does not. Abram does not. Now, prior to this, one of the other things that Abram told King Nimrod is he said, you're doing the same things that the people did before the flood, which made God destroy the world. How foolish are you, my king? This is what was perplexing Nimrod's mind, because he knew, and you got texts out there in Samaria where he had high respect for Lord Aratai, those living up in the mountains, because Nimrod knew. He wasn't stupid. He knew. He threw Abram into that fire, and Abram was not burned. He says in the text that he didn't burn. And he was in there for 3 days. So Jesus was in the tomb for 3 days, according to... And Nimrod keeps coming back and forth for these 3 days and yelling in there, "Are you still alive?" And Abram keeps yelling back, he goes, "I'm still alive in here. Why haven't you burned up?" And finally Abram answers him and says, "I don't rightly know, but it must be because of the God of our fathers that preserves me in this flame." Now, first judgment was with water, but you will be passed through the fire. Abram comes out, and for a while and Nimrod he's respected, but the witchy people come in and mess with him again. Abram is living with his father Terah, and this is where God is going to call him out into the land that would ultimately be Israel. And Abraham, his name was changed to Abraham. He did a lot of stupid things, but he loved and trusted God, and it was accounted unto him as righteousness. I, Enoch, a righteous man whose eyes were opened by God. This word righteous begins to look more and more important, doesn't it? In Genesis, you have this unusual character that emerges named Melchizedek, who Abraham goes and he pays tithes of 10% after God gave him favor to victory in battle over the armies that had captured Lot. Melchizedek is listed as king and priest. There are only 3 entities in the entire Bible, start to finish, that have that title: king and priest. One is Melchizedek. The next one would be Jesus Christ. And the last would be the church. I give you the power to be kings and priests. Now, I'd like to hit pause for just a second on Melchizedek and this term that you're seeing used right there, King of Righteousness. Now, Melchizedek would be the king and priest of Salem or Jerusalem. This is the land, that whole area, modern day Israel, before there was even such a word as Palestine or Israel or Canaan, where the Canaanite giants would be out there, sparkled loose, that the Israelites would have to conquer, worshiping their god Baal. This land, this little bitty land, the same land where Jesus would walk out of that tomb, a body that has never been found and went missing 3 days after his crucifixion, with many people seeing Jesus before he ultimately left out of this place with a cast of angels. And in many of these appearances of Jesus, following, you no longer, after the crucifixion, you no longer, and this is critical, see Jesus as the suffering servant on his way to becoming the sacrifice. But from here all the way through, you're now seeing Jesus in a new way, the other side of that cross. He's walking into rooms through walls, yet saying, touch me, feel me. I'm as real as you are. Jesus, whose actual entry into Jerusalem was predicted to the money in advance in the book of Daniel. He's giving you the precise number of days before Jesus rides in the front gate of Jerusalem on the donkey, as predicted by Zechariah. The Pharisees, the uppity-ups, were continuously, their minds were tangled up and their vision focused on how can we trip up Jesus. And Jesus responded in many instances to things that are just like the quantum physics of this place, a fundamental paradox to man's understanding, yet when examined closely could still occur no other way. Now, if Jesus Christ is in the order of Melchizedek, there are some who say that this Melchizedek was Shem, the son for whom Noah placed the largest blessing on. And it is true that Shem was given the land, which is today Israel. These things being true, and in the book of Yasher, which comes from Hebrew tradition, I would point out, would lend support to the possibility of Melchizedek and Shem being the same person. However, under examination of that passage in Yasher, I'm not so sure. Let me read you a passage out of the book of Hebrews, and you decide. Melchizedek was king of Salem and priest of God Most High. He met Abraham returning from the defeat of the kings and blessed him. And Abraham gave him a tenth of everything. First, the name Melchizedek means king of righteousness. Then also king of Salem, which means the king of peace. He was without father or mother, with no genealogy, without beginning or end of days. Resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest everlasting. Those are pretty bold words in Hebrews. In the book of Joshua, before they go and do battle with Jericho, this unusual battle, this was unlike any other battle scenario that you would have. Joshua is confronted by, he says, appeared to be a man that came out, and he drew his sword and he said, are you for us or against us? And the man replied, I am the commander of the armies of the Lord. Sometimes this gets translated the angel of the Lord, but wait a second. And then he says to Joshua, take off your sandals. You're standing on holy ground. Angels, at least not angels of God, do not tell men to take off their sandals, for they're on holy ground. So who was Joshua meeting that day? Of course, the voice that came to Moses through the burning bush Moses asked, who shall I say that you are? He said, I am. Jesus, when you fast forward, and he's talking to the Pharisees, they nearly stoned him. They wanted to, they attempted to, because he said, before Abraham was, I am. And of course, out there with the loaves and fishes, Jesus seems to be around food a lot. Out there with the loaves and the fishes, he's got a couple of fish and a little bit of bread, and he's breaking it off and asking, how many bags do we have left over after we fed 5,000? And then when the Mount of Transfiguration, where Jesus transfigures before the disciples, and there are other figures present with him. Who was Jesus meeting with at that moment? And then at the crucifixion, after he has been brutally crucified, and Israel is torn over the events that have occurred. And then the tomb is missing the body. And two disciples were walking, and they look perhaps maybe sorrowful. They feel like maybe everything that they've believed in has been ripped from their hands, because they weren't understanding this time thing of the Savior and how the prophecies fulfill themselves out. They didn't understand all of his language when he was saying to them redundantly, the cup that my Father hands me, shall I not drink it? One of my absolute favorite all-time lines in the entirety of the Bible is right at this point. You've got to see that these disciples, there are dark hours, and then there are really dark hours, and then there are the hours that they were standing in. From their perception, everything that they believed had to have been wrong. Their world had just collapsed totally in on them. And here comes this stranger. They don't know it's Jesus. But he walks up and he's missing his beard, perhaps robe. They can't tell who he is. But the last thing they're suspecting is that it's Jesus. And one of them says to him, he asks, what's going on? One of them responds to him and says, Are you a stranger? Have you not heard of all of the things that have gone on here in Jerusalem? And Jesus just looks over at them and says, what things? This unusual stranger begins walking down the road with them, and he's beginning to tell them about the prophecies, just like the Jews today, with their eyes focused on this coming king who would hopefully make them the bad dog on the block. But they're really not reading the other scriptures that are saying at what price that king would pay to take away their sins and save their souls so they could even enter that kingdom. But whatever the case, this unusual stranger seems to know an awful lot about all the little specific prophecies leading to those very hours. No matter what view a person has on Melchizedek, I know this, that just as when Abram was there thousands of years before, and Melchizedek broke out the bread and wine, when those two disciples went up into the room with this stranger that they didn't yet know was their Messiah, risen from the dead. Into one moment in the text where he reaches for the bread to break it. And at that moment it snapped because they could see his hands. With your permission, I'd like to read to you just a couple of things right out of the book of Enoch. And I don't really want to argue right now whether the book, from my view, is not just authentic. This is a pre-flood text that would have been on that boat with Noah. It would have been one of the very treasured things in his entire life. We have copies, but bear in mind at least this, that portions of Enoch were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So this is about 300 years before Jesus Christ at minimum. So bear that in mind as I read. This is Enoch's. He is actually seeing. Let me just read it to you. And at that time I beheld the Ancient of Days, while he sat on the throne of his glory, and the books of the living were opened before him. The book of the living. You hear about this same book when Moses was on the mountain. Then the hearts of the saints were filled with joy, because the number of the righteous had been offered. Now, notice that he uses this word righteous. Enoch starts by stating, these are the words of the blessing of Enoch. Blessed be the elect and righteous. The elect is going to be what leads through Israel. The righteous is the church. Now, within that group, in Enoch, this righteous, you're going to have two different parts to this group called the righteous. Some that are sort of playing little games, and some that are serious. And they have their eyes looking outside of this place. Then the hearts of the saints were filled with joy, because the number of the righteous had been offered. The supplication of the saints heard. Now listen to this. And the blood of the righteous, this righteous one, accepted by the Lord of spirits. You could say Lord of hosts. Who is this righteous one upon whom the blood had been accepted on behalf of the saints who are written in that book? And in that place I beheld, as it were, fountains of righteousness, which encircled many springs of, as it were, flowing wisdom. And of these the thirsty came and drank and were filled, having habitation with the righteous and the elect. And in that hour this Son of Man was named before the Lord of spirits, and his name in the presence of the Ancient of Days. Yea, before the sun and the signs were made, before the stars of the heavens formed, his name was named before the Lord of spirits. He shall be a staff unto the righteous to lean upon, so they shall not stumble. He shall be the light to all nations, and the hope for those of troubled heart. Now I'm skipping backwards just a little bit to the beginning of chapter 46, where Enoch has just stepped in with the angels, and this is what he says. And there I beheld the Ancient of Days, the Godhead, whose head was like that of white wool, and yet with him was another. Mind you, this text is at least 300 years before it's a pre-flood text. whose countenance resembled that of a man. His countenance was full of grace, like one of the holy angels. Then I inquired of the angel who went with me, who showed me these secret things, and I asked him concerning this one, this Son of Man, who he was, whence he was, and why he accompanied the Ancient of Days. The angel answered unto me and said, This Son of Man, to whom all righteousness belongs, and who will reveal all the secret things and treasures of that which is concealed, for the Lord of spirits hath chosen him. This Son of Man, whom you now behold, shall raise up kings and the mighty from their dwelling places, and the powerful from their thrones, and loosen the bridles and break in pieces the teeth of the sinners. He shall hurl the kings from their thrones. This goes on. Now, if we're reading down, you come to that spot where it says the blood of this righteous one would be required before the Lord of spirits, and it had been accepted on behalf of those whose names are written in the book. Oh, but wait, let me go just a touch further. It would be unfair to stop here. Now I want you to follow what's about to be said. There's a lot of talk against this unusual event in the Bible called the rapture. I'm just going to read this to you, and you tell me how it sounds. With him, this Son of Man, with him dwells the spirit of intellectual wisdom and the spirit of instruction and power, and also the spirit of those who go to sleep, that means die, in righteousness. Yet, this is from chapter 49. Listen to this. In those days, we've now fast forwarded to the end of time. That's what the context above would have put us. Context where Enoch is stating that men following these days will no longer have need to secure themselves in and fly. Strange words for a fake text to be talking about airplanes. Goes on here. In those days, these days at the end, the saints and the righteous, the chosen, a portion of the chosen, shall and I'll get to that in a second. Don't let me cheat you. In those days, the saints and the chosen shall undergo a change. The light of day shall rest upon them, and the splendor and glory of the saints shall be changed. Sounds an awful lot like Paul. Now listen to this next sentence. In the day of trouble, this is a reference. You have Jacob's time of trouble. You've got this end of time that's being covered in Revelations, this time of tribulation at the end, where Enoch actually starts. In the day of trouble, that's what he's referring to here, evil shall be heaped upon the sinners, but the righteous shall triumph in the name of the Lord of spirits. And others, so who are these others? So there's some set that's going to undergo a change, just like the virgins. Remember, 5 were ready, and the other 5, they weren't ready. They didn't have the oil for their lamps. When the bridegroom came through, and they knew what they had missed, because they knew that the bridegroom was coming. It doesn't mean they won't ever get, but they're not going to go into that wedding feast because they had missed it. And what were they specifically doing in that parable that Jesus was giving. And Enoch always referred to his life as a parable. That's another story. But those virgins that had missed the bridegroom when he came through at an hour that they thought, oh, he's not coming, they were out trying to buy the oil for their lamps and diddle-daddling about. Well, the others that were ready, they went. Now listen to this. These others, so this other group who didn't undergo the change, but they knew. And these are both in the righteous or the church. Others shall be made to see that they must repent and forsake what? The works of their hands. And that glory awaits them not in the presence of the Lord of spirits. But yet, in his name, still shall they be saved. Now, many in this hour in which we're living in right now, in the science crowd, the so-called smart people. Some of them actually are smart. Some of them within the liberal university, hardcore liberal university guys. These people in their sciences, they believe different than I do about what science is. They think science is measuring something. And that's what science is. You're measuring something and trying to figure out how something works. Like DNA is building biological organisms, biological entities like you and me, or animals, into reality, literally from scratch. That's what the coding is doing. Every cell, every organ, every symbiotic system, the fabric of all of it coming together like a perfect glove. All of it done by digital coding. And the science guys will measure little portions of it because they don't know how much of it works. But if they can figure out how a little portion of it works, oh, look, we figured something out. Look at us, look at us. And then suddenly figuring out how something tiny, some tiny little part of it works, somehow makes them equal to creating it. And this is the same crowd of folks, mind you, that make plastic monkey men and tell you that monkeys breeding eventually makes people. That's where that kind of thinking leads. From my view, I lay that in your hands. But this is what I know, is that there are real sciences in this place, and you can have all the head knowledge. You could know how every strand works, and it will benefit you nothing. There's a science above all sciences in this place, the only one that matters. And that is the science of salvation. This place is a doorway, a gate, the mother, the gate of all gates. And it will only matter in the end what door you chose. And one of them has the illusion of being a lot of doors. And this science of salvation, the mother of all sciences, even the angels above are learning from us about salvation. They're learning about their Creator through us. This science of salvation is much more than that, though. This isn't something, as we covered a minute ago, that you can do with your hands or with the works that you do or good things. In fact, if you're watching this video and you say you do not know how screwed up I am and how wrong everything and how bad I am, and you're probably in good shape. Let me justify that. Everywhere that Jesus went, his message was the reverse of what would make sense. The people that were the most broken and full of the most problems were the ones he was lifting up. and stating your reward is great. All you've got to do is in here. There's nothing you can do with your hands to work your way out of. That doesn't mean don't go do good things, but there should be a product of the heart, not a product of some surface illusion. That the people that pretended, people that believed, I didn't pretend, they believed. The kings of the earth, the rulers, the Pharisees, which we have lots of those running around today. They're everywhere. Will proclaim that they've got it all figured out. Those were the people who were in the most dire shape, and they didn't even know it. They went and killed Jesus. They believed it so dearly. What I'm stating to you is this, and make no illusion about it. Salvation does not come from a Bible. It does not come from a scripture in that Bible. It does not come from a special Bible. It does not come from any chant, any incantation, any witchcraft, any pagan text. It does not come from the special alien who has the good message over the bad aliens, or the spirit that's the nice one as opposed to the unnice one. None of these things are what salvation is. Salvation is a man. And when you understand that, if you can understand that, and wrap your head around it, that this is laying it all on a man. See, here's the problem, is that we are a skewed point on a line. We are imperfect. In the presence of a perfect God, these two things cannot meet. We need a mediator between us and God. And that's what that man is. He is that doorway. Hell is full of men and women who, many of them, many of those passages, memorized much of those scriptures, right down to the yots and tittles. And that's a good thing to know those. The Lord says, my children suffer from lack of knowledge. If any seeks wisdom, let him ask. What it says about wisdom is that it is the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. The fear of the understanding that this is not a game, that this is real. The fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. And the second thing, which is often forgotten, is the knowledge of the holy. That you would fear God as you would your king. Hell is full of people that knew those pages, those precious pages of Scripture. But if it never makes it from here down to here, then of what gain was it? And more than this, even the atheists down there, do you know what they're all doing down there? Whether you're reading Enoch, what they're doing down there in those prisons that are owned by God, called hell. It's not owned by the devil. This isn't a Dante's Inferno Catholic version. Nothing against the Catholic Dante's Inferno. It's probably not an accurate depiction of hell. Hell is a prison, and it is owned by God. The devil's not down there having people shovel coal. It's a prison. What they're all doing down there between their screams is they are praying. They are screaming out in prayer, and they all have one wish. Even the atheist who is screaming prayers has one wish in that place. And that is that he had one human breath left. Then he could say, Lord Jesus, I take you. Lord Jesus, take me as I am and save me. One breath left to work out that salvation thing. Here's the issue there. Is that they're all praying, but there's nobody listening. And there never will be. And never is a big word. That's a word neither you nor I can even comprehend. Never. Again, I say to you, salvation is not a scripture or a special Bible or a memorization of every passage or how to tell everybody else that they're wrong because you figured the passages out. The salvation is a man. I'm Trey Smith. God bless every last one of you on the other side of the screen.